They almost missed it. The man on the beach had no wallet, no ID, every label torn from his clothes. But sewn into a hidden fob pocket inside his trousers was a piece of paper. 2 words, Persian, meaning it is ended. It wasn't ended. It was just beginning. On the morning of December 1st, 1948, police were called to a beach outside Adelaide. A man was lying against the seawall in a jacket, a tie, and polished shoes. He had no wallet, no identity papers. The labels had been cut from his clothes. That is where the case starts. It does not end there. It does not end anywhere clean. The Somerton Man case attracts the wrong kind of attention. It gets sold as a spy mystery, a Cold War cipher, a dead man no one could name because someone powerful did not want him named. That version is more satisfying than the evidence supports. The real shape of the case is procedural, and it is harder to shake. Police keep finding things that should move the file forward. Clothing, luggage, a name on fabric, a scrap of paper, a book, a phone number, a witness who reacts to a plaster cast in a way no one in the room forgets. Each object opens a route. Each route closes before it gets anywhere useful. That is the pressure here. Not one theatrical clue. Ordinary evidence, placed in sequence, refusing to resolve. The night before, on November 30th, 2 separate couples passed the man lying near the seawall at Somerton Park. The first couple noticed him raise his arm and let it fall. They kept walking. The second couple, passing later, noticed he was not moving and was not reacting to the mosquitoes landing on his face. They kept walking too. He was still there at dawn. That opening is already uncomfortable, and not because anything dramatic happened. He died in public, close enough for strangers to register his posture, and still completely alone. The detail that stays is the arm dropping. Someone saw a man lift his arm and thought nothing of it. That moment is the edge of the case. Police arrived at 6:30 a.m. The man was lying with his head against the seawall, legs extended, feet crossed. He was dressed for the city, shirt, tie, trousers, pullover, jacket, socks, polished shoes. Beside him a cigarette, half-smoked, then abandoned. His pockets held ordinary things, chewing gum, matches, a comb, cigarettes in a packet that did not match the brand inside, a bus ticket, an unused train ticket from Adelaide to Henley Beach. The ordinary items made the absences sharper. No wallet, no identity papers, no obvious injury, no immediate cause of death. The body itself suggested a history. He appeared physically fit, probably in his 40s. His hands did not look like a laborer's. Doctors kept returning to his calf muscles, which were unusually developed, the kind of development that implies a specific physical routine, a discipline, a practice. Dancing was suggested. Athletics. Some private habit of the body. The trouble is that the calf muscles, like everything else, pointed somewhere without arriving. They suggested a person. They did not return one. The autopsy found no clean cause of death. Investigators considered poisoning. There was no obvious violence, and the internal findings suggested significant distress. But the tests did not produce a named substance, so before the famous scrap of paper ever appears, the case already has its shape. A body physically specific enough to examine closely, with no name, no cause of death, and no obvious way in. When police examined his clothing, they found that the labels had been removed. In 1948, that meant something practical. A clothing label could lead to a tailor, a laundry, a shop, a name written in chalk on an order slip, a moment of cash changing hands while someone stood still long enough to be remembered. Labels were administrative handles on a life. On this man, they had been cut away. Not one missing tag that might be wear or repair. Enough of them, gone deliberately enough, that investigators read it as erasure. That word erasure does the same work the word conspiracy does. It jumps past a question. The narrower reading is more useful. The simplest routes back to the man had been removed before police ever touched the file. By whom, for what reason, the labels cannot say. What they do say is this: someone wanted him harder to place. The public could look at his face. Police could publish descriptions. Doctors could record his body in careful detail. None of it returned him to a family, a rooming house, a workplace, a routine. The next object should have changed that. It gave police more. It just didn't give them him. On January 14th, 1949, 6 weeks after the body was found, staff at Adelaide railway station found a brown suitcase that had been checked in on the morning of November 30th, the day before the body was discovered. Police believed it was his. If they were right, it gave them something they had not had, a last known movement through Adelaide. A man checking luggage, expecting to collect it later. Inside were pajamas, a dressing gown, slippers, shaving items, the kind of luggage that says someone expected to keep living past the next morning. Then the inventory changes. Among the ordinary overnight things, a screwdriver, scissors with sharpened points, a stenciling brush for marking cargo, and a table knife that had been cut down and resharpened into something compact and purposeful. There was also a pair of trousers with beach sand in the cuffs. And orange waxed thread, reportedly unusual in Australia at the time. That thread is the first physical bridge in the case. The same kind of thread appeared to have been used to repair the pocket lining of the trousers the dead man was wearing when he was found. Suitcase to trousers to body. A material line. But a material line is not an identity. Some items in the suitcase carried versions of a name, Keen or T-Keen. Police looked for a missing Keen who fit the description of the man on the beach. No clean match. The suitcase did something frustrating and precise. It made the man less anonymous without making him identifiable. Police had belongings now. Tools, clothing, a probable movement through Adelaide station, a name fragment that led nowhere. They still did not have the man. And they still had no clear reason why a neatly dressed traveler with luggage at the station ended up dead on a beach with an unused train ticket in his pocket. Months after the body was found, investigators found the clue that gave the case its second name. Sewn into the waistband of the man's trousers was a small fob pocket. Inside it, a tiny rolled scrap of paper, 2 words printed on it, Tamam Shud, usually translated as "it is finished" or "it is ended." The phrase came from the closing lines of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, Edward Fitzgerald's translation, a collection of poetry about mortality, regret, fate, pleasure, and the shortness of available time. The symbolism is obvious enough that it barely needs saying. A dead man with a final phrase hidden in a secret pocket, and the phrase means the end. But the symbolism is not the useful part. The paper is. The scrap was not a note the man had written. It had been cut or torn from a printed book. That meant police were no longer looking for a name. They were looking for a page, a specific book with a specific tear, somewhere in Adelaide in someone's hands. If they found the book, they might find the route back. Before the Somerton book entered the file, the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam had already appeared beside a death in Australia. In 1945, 3 years earlier, a man named George Marshall died in the Sydney area. Accounts of the scene connect his death to a copy of the same book. There is no confirmed link between Marshall and the Somerton Man. The association may be coincidence. It may say more about the appeal of Fitzgerald's translation to a certain kind of reader in a certain frame of mind than it says about either death. What it does is change the temperature of the next section. When the Somerton scrap appears, the Rubaiyat is not a random title pulled from a shelf. It is a book that had already gathered a death around it in Australia. That does not explain anything. It makes the book harder to treat as incidental. Police released an image of the scrap and appealed for the book it came from. A man came forward with a copy of the Rubaiyat. The final words had been torn from the last page. Microscopic tests reportedly indicated that the scrap hidden in the dead man's trousers matched the torn area of that page. This is the central physical bridge of the case. Body to scrap, scrap to book. But the book had not been found in the dead man's suitcase, his pocket, his room, or any place clearly belonging to him. According to most accounts, it had turned up in an open roof car parked on Jetty Road in Glenelg, either in the rear floor well or on the back seat. The man associated with the car reportedly did not connect it to the police appeal until he saw it in the press. So the strongest physical clue in the file arrived through a stranger's car. The timing adds another layer. Some reporting placed the book's discovery before the body was found. Detective Jerry Felters later described it as just after. Both versions leave a gap. If the book entered the car before the death, then the dead man's movements that day become harder to read. If it arrived after, then it somehow moved from his orbit into a stranger's vehicle after he was already dead. Neither route is clean. Inside the back of the book, investigators found faint impressions from writing, marks left by pressure through a page. They recovered a telephone number, a second number, and lines of capital letters. The scrap had been hidden in a pocket sewn into the dead man's trousers. The book it came from had been found in a car parked near where he died, and inside that book was a telephone number. The telephone number led police to Jessica Ellen Thompson, often called Jo, born Jessie Harkness, referred to in older accounts under pseudonyms including Jestin. She lived on Mosley Street in Glenelg, about 400 meters from the seawall where the body had been found. This part of the case needs to be handled carefully. A phone number is not an accusation. It does, however, take the book out of abstraction. It stops being a literary object or a puzzle and becomes something that exists inside a person's life. When police spoke to Thompson, she denied knowing the dead man. She could not explain why her number appeared in the back of his book, or why a man connected to that book had died so close to her home. She also reported that sometime in late 1948, an unidentified man had come to her address and asked a neighbor about her. Police had a dead man near the beach, a book physically connected to that dead man, a woman near the beach whose number was written inside that book, a report of an unidentified man asking after her. Then police showed Thompson the plaster cast. She was standing in a police station, looking at the preserved face of a dead man she said she did not know. Detective Sergeant Lionel Lean later described her as completely taken aback, close enough to fainting that it was noted. Paul Lawson, the technician who had made the cast and was present when she saw it, said she looked at the bust, looked away, and would not look at it again. That is not proof of anything. Shock is not recognition, and recognition would not be guilt. But the reaction was strong enough that two different men remembered it, described it separately, and put it on record years later. A woman looked at a dead man's face and turned away from it. That became part of the file. Thompson asked police not to keep a permanent record of her name and not to release her details publicly. She said the connection to the case would be embarrassing and harmful to her reputation. Police agreed. That decision protected her. It also closed part of the file permanently. Years later, Thompson's daughter Kate said in a TV interview that she believed her mother had known the dead man. That is a private belief, not an established fact. But it is how the case continued to live inside the family long after police left the room. During the Second World War, while working as a nurse at Royal North Shore Hospital in Sydney, Jo Thompson gave a copy of the Rubaiyat to an Australian Army lieutenant named Alf Boxall. That sits quietly in the file until the investigation reaches her. Then it lands differently. Police now had a dead man physically linked to the Rubaiyat, a woman whose number was in the dead man's book, and a soldier she had given the same title to during the war. For a moment it looked like an answer. Perhaps the unidentified man on the beach was the lieutenant she had known. Then police found Alf Boxall in Sydney, alive. His copy of the Rubaiyat with the final words still intact. That explanation collapsed, but what remained behind it did not. Thompson had given the Rubaiyat to a man. A different Rubaiyat connected to a different man had been found near her. That man was dead. Her number was in his book. The Boxall theory failed. It proved one thing cleanly. The Rubaiyat was not an abstract symbol in Thompson's story. It was an object she had actually given to a man, a living man. The connection between her, the book, and the dead man near the beach remained without an answer. Investigators also recovered capital letters from the back of the book, not sentences. Blocks of letters pressed into the page through writing on a sheet placed above it, readable only under the right light. In a case already involving a hidden phrase, missing labels, a dead man without a name, and a phone number leading to a woman near the beach, those letters were always going to pull the room toward espionage. But the responsible framing is simpler. The letters have never been solved in a way that became authoritative. That single fact matters enormously, because this is the piece of evidence in the case that appears most directly to offer a voice. If it is a cipher, it may be the most important thing in the file. If it is not, if it is private shorthand initials, a memory aid, a racing notation, then it is private debris from a life that can no longer speak for itself, made sinister only by its context. The ceiling on the spy story is lower than the letters first suggest. Either way, they sit in the back of the book like a door that is open an inch. There is something behind it. The case has never been able to push through. For more than 70 years, The file had no name. Then in 2022, one arrived. University of Adelaide professor Derek Abbott, working with genealogist Colleen Fitzpatrick, announced that DNA recovered from hairs preserved in the plaster death mask had identified the Somerton Man as Carl Charles Webb, born in Footscray, Melbourne in 1905, an electrical engineer and instrument maker. A man with siblings, work records, a history. South Australia police had not formally confirmed the identification in the same way the researchers presented it. The careful phrasing remains. Researchers said the Somerton Man was Carl Webb. If that identification holds, the body gains a human outline. Webb married Dorothy Robertson in 1941. Later accounts describe an unhappy marriage. Dorothy described him as solitary, withdrawn, sometimes threatening. She said he wrote poetry, much of it focused on death. He had attempted suicide in 1946 with an overdose of ether. The same year, Dorothy left. By 1947, Webb had moved out of their shared address. After that, the trail thinned. That detail sits differently beside the Rubaiyat, not as proof of anything, as a private preoccupation that suddenly has a body and a book beside it. One possible explanation for his presence in South Australia is quietly devastating. He may have gone there looking for Dorothy, who was later living in the state. The spy novel version loses oxygen here. A private tragedy enters the room. The keen thread from the suitcase also shifts slightly. Webb had family connections to the surname Keane, which may explain why the luggage carried name fragments police could never attach to a missing person. Carl Webb may explain why nobody in Adelaide immediately claimed the body. He may explain the poetry and the death-focused writing. He may make the case sadder and more human than the stranger versions allowed. But a name does not clean up a scene. The easiest version of this case has always been the most comfortable one. Unknown man. Spy code. Mysterious woman. Cold War plot. It moves fast because it discards the parts that resist explanation. The harder version keeps the objects. Carl Webb may have been a real man in collapse, traveling to South Australia for a reason that was personal and probably painful, dying there by means that have never been confirmed. That version is plausible. It is also incomplete. Because when he died, the evidence around him did not behave. The formal clothes on beach sand, the labels cut away. The suitcase at the station with overnight items beside altered tools and waxed thread connecting that luggage to the trousers on the body. The scrap of paper hidden in a pocket sewn inside those trousers, torn from the final page of a book. The book found not in any place belonging to him, but in a stranger's car parked near where he died. The phone number inside that book leading to a woman 400 meters from the seawall. Her reaction to his preserved face. The copy of the same book she had given to a soldier during the war. The earlier death in Sydney connected to another copy of the same title. The capital letters pressed into the back cover, unsolved. And underneath all of it, the most basic absence. No settled cause of death. The body has been argued over for decades. Poison, suicide, accident, illness, murder, private collapse. None of those words has closed the file. Identified does not mean solved. The case no longer needs to be nameless to remain unresolved. If the Somerton Man was Carl Webb, the mystery did not end, it narrowed. The body has a name now. The page is still missing.